Welcome to the Presence Podcast, where I interview exceptional people at exceptional homes. I have Patrick Mathieson with me today, who's an investor at Toba Capital, and he's invested in many of Los Angeles' most successful tech companies, and he's an investor in luxury presence as well since our Series A. I'm very excited to have him on. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thanks for having me, Malte. I appreciate it.
You invest in startups in the earliest stage, so I'm curious what attracted you to startups initially?
Well, I've always been interested in entrepreneurship. Always been interested in businesses, just how businesses are run, how they're grown. Startups, as you know, are sort of like the condensed apotheosis of business formation and getting to decide what kind of business you want to build, right? Getting to decide exactly the attributes that you want to sort of create. And I think it's kind of like art meets science in some ways. And so sort of been drawn to I think business is big and small are very interesting, but startups in particular, it's just, there's just something special about it.
How did you get your start as a venture capitalist?
I had a couple year stint working in enterprise software. So I was a product manager. I was a business analyst. I did a couple things related to finance and operations. Just learning from a great mentor who was running a startup and sort of gave me a bunch of exposure into just how you actually run a company like this, at least in the software world. He got an opportunity to join this firm. He hired me shortly thereafter, and that was 7 years ago. So just kind of working for someone that pivoted into that space, followed a mentor, and here I am.
That's great. How many investments have you made since then?
I've probably made, through Toba, probably separate companies, maybe 11 or 12.
Yeah.
And that's probably 20 to 25, maybe 30 individual investments over that time, as far as ones I've sourced.
What's something you look for when you initially meet with an entrepreneur?
I think, should I talk about, the attributes that you have or just things I liked about you, or what do you think?
In general, I guess I'm curious when an entrepreneur, a founder, someone with an idea comes to you, what are some of the things that you want to see in order to get excited and ultimately write a check?
I think the biggest thing, there's a million attributes, but I think for me personally, I think customer obsession is the biggest one. I'm kind of drawn to these verticalized businesses. So like yours, for example, is in the real estate market. There's a lot of businesses that are sort of that flavor that I'm particularly into. And I think there's sort of this element of customer focus, right? Like you really know kind of who your core client is, and you sort of build your day around figuring out how that person thinks and serving them. I'm really attracted to that concept in general. I think conversely, a bad sign or something that would turn me off in general is maybe someone was a little too drawn to the startup ecosystem in general, or the fundraising ecosystem, or is really into who the hot VCs are and kind of like what they think and whatnot. So people who are a little bit less sort of drawn to those secondary things and are just like getting in the head of their customer sort of 24/7. I love that.
At what stage do you typically invest in a company, and how far along are these different startups you invest in?
We sometimes go super early. I invested recently in a seed round of a company called Samply, which is I think literally had 2 employees at the time, like a virtual, they're working out of their homes, just building tools for musicians. That's really early. That's probably atypical for us. We usually join up kind of around the point where we met you guys, which is at the Series A. So you guys were doing a few $1 million of recurring revenue at the time. I think you had 20 or 25 employees. You're obviously much bigger now in both those dimensions, but that's sort of like a typical entry point for us.
What are some common characteristics that you see among successful startups, those that are growing fast? What do they do right?
I think a big thing that enters my thinking a lot is just this concept of opportunity cost, right? So every time you're doing something that's not the most important thing you could possibly be doing, you are under-optimizing your time, right? Which is why I think in the order of operations, customers come first, I guess it's sort of customers and employees are sort of tied, right? And then everything else is kind of secondary to that. So one of the things that I think is really impressive about your business is you have a clear idea of who your core client is, and you have a core idea of who your core client is not, right? And I think you guys take pains to figure out, not in a mean way or anything, but sort of figure out, okay, if I'm talking to a prospective client who could be using luxury presence and they're not really the kind of agent that you guys serve, I think in a graceful way, you figure out how to not be spending too much time in those conversations, and you really orient towards sort of the core high-end luxury agent that's kind of like the bedrock you built your business around. And you have 3,000 of those clients right now and rising super fast. So just these themes of just focus, figuring out who you are, figuring out who you're not, I think are really, really important.
So a lot of the companies that you've invested in are SaaS businesses or software as a service. And I'm curious why this business model has become so popular and what the advantages are perhaps to customers of those businesses.
Well, I think that, there's sort of this like explosion in technology and especially internet infrastructure that is sort of like, it's been a 30-year process, but it's really sort of gone thermonuclear in the last 10 years. There's sort of been this movement to cloud infrastructure that really allows you to serve a much broader range of businesses than was typical in the past. So if you look at like the sort of technology companies that came up in the 90s and 80s and whatnot, they're enterprise software businesses, right? I mean, they sort of required companies to own their own data centers and sort of just be sort of a large company to take advantage of these things. At the same time, on the low end, you have consumer technology, right? So you have, your Apple device. There's a bunch of stuff that's sort of pushed down to the end consumer. But there's kind of this middle area, which is what I'm excited about, which is technologies for small and mid-sized businesses. And I think the cloud really enables that, right? These software as a service companies, they sort of let you basically say, okay, we're gonna build a solution, but we're gonna make it for it's a caliber of customer or client or buyer that is neither like the broad masses, but is neither some super elite thing for just only the top enterprises, right? You can deliver and produce solutions for real estate agents, and of which there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. It used to be the case that anything that was made for them that they could access was really not very good, right? I think one of the things that you guys have done really well is make incredibly high quality software, but make it accessible to a customer like the real estate agent, particularly the higher end real estate agent. You can really do that with any company that you want, right? And if you just look at the successful businesses that are sort of these B2B style businesses, you're finding holes in the market. You build a solution once, and then you can broadcast it to just hundreds and thousands, if not tens of thousands of clients, and give them the same consistency of experience, but not feel like you have to overcharge it for them to eat them either, right? So it's just a massive wave that's happening right now, and your clients are benefiting from this very much.
And it allows you to launch new features and evolve the platform a lot faster than something that's perhaps custom built and lives on its own server somewhere and then needs to be updated by an individual developer. So what we're seeing is we're able to provide a lot faster iteration on the software products and tools and account for the feedback from customers a lot more easily than perhaps was possible in the old days of doing things. The analogy I like to give is always of a car, and a lot of our listeners, are, including myself, are leasing cars for that reason, right? That there's a new car every few years that you might want to get into, and it might not make sense to buy one. And technology and software is actually changing probably a lot faster than even cars. So if there's something new that you want every year or every month, paying for that every single time with a big upfront payment doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and I think to go back to these points about picking your customer and why that's so important and being customer obsessed as an entrepreneur, I mean, that is half the battle in setting up your company, right? If you were to create a version of this business which was sort of meant for every real estate agent ever, right? That would be a difficult thing to do well, right? Because the needs of maybe a part-time real estate agent are very different than a real estate agent, running a big shop in Beverly Hills, right? And so what you can sort of do, and I think a lot of the work of building a company that grows and becomes strong and valuable is if you pick a segment that's important and is a good kind of client segment to work with, that's sort of like that respects the technology you're building, that are willing to pay for value, and are going to endure and be around and be partners with you maybe, for a decade, right? Maybe they're running their website and luxury presence for 20 years. Who knows? Like there's an art to kind of figuring out who those folks are. I think you guys have done a brilliant job in sort of defining like who is the luxury presence ideal client. Let's find them. Let's bring them into the world, or let's bring them into our world. Let's give them a value proposition that makes sense, where they're getting more value than it costs to procure the solution. And you're doing a great job with it.
Thank you. Yeah, for us, it's always been, let's focus on the successful agents and those that are serious about building their business, that are going to be in the industry for many years, and work with them rather than perhaps someone who is moving in and out or is doing it part-time. To your point, their needs are going to be different. And for us, it's always been, let's focus on those that are very successful, so we can best meet their needs and listen to their feedback.
And those kind of clients are going to respect for and pay for value as well, right? So, right. You're not Wix.
Yeah.
right? And that for a certain caliber of client, that's the right solution for them. You're providing a lot of value above and beyond that. It does not cost as much as Wix, but it certainly does not cost as much as a completely like bespoke custom solution, which doesn't make sense for most agents anyways. You're providing a ton of value to that kind of that core segment, the like you said, I don't know what word you said, but like the serious agent, the luxury agent, the one who's going to be in business 20 years from now.
And you mentioned that the world is changing very quickly. Technology is evolving, and obviously that's happening in the real estate industry, which historically perhaps has been a little bit slower to adopt technology than other industries. And one trend that we've been seeing now for several years is that of iBuyers. So large aggregators, large companies that are getting into the business of buying and selling homes. And a lot of our clients are concerned about it because they feel that it could replace them over time. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on where you see this going and perhaps what changes technology is going to bring over the next 10 years.
Well, whenever there's a new entrant into a market, it sort of applies pressure to the incumbents, and then you kind of are in an adapt or die situation, right? And so, this is sort of, if I understand the way the iBuyer businesses work, they're sort of applying pressure in a specific way. Certainly not across the board, certainly not a fit to anyone who would want to sell their home, for instance. I think the way those businesses work is that you can get an instant offer on your home relatively quickly, but it's somewhat below the price that you would get if you actually went through a true process with a serious agent, right? Perhaps much lower, right? So, for someone who wants to sell their home in 10 minutes, that is a segment, and sort of I think those iBuyers are serving that segment in a way that is okay. I think that segment becomes, if it ever was, it especially becomes no longer of interest to the segment that really should be working with the kind of agents that you're serving, right? I went through, a home buying transaction recently, and one of the things, or I guess about a year ago, and I think there's sort of a couple elements that made it special for me to go through that, and one was getting to know the agents and feeling like they were contributing to my success and my family's success as an individual. I kind of wanted to return that success, and because we had a good home buying experience, I've sent referrals, to them so that they can grow their business. I mean, I'm not going to feel that way about working with Open Door, right? I'm not going to have that experience or feel that way or have any affinity for that. Also, going through the process and touring these homes with them allowed them to teach me about like things that I should care about in buying a home. Was the first home I bought. A lot of the stuff I don't know anything about. I don't know about trussets, and I don't know how plumbing works, or I should, but I don't, right? And so these are various things that can only be provided by the agent. And I think when you have these technology trends that sort of apply pressure to a market like this, you have to kind of retrench around like what your strengths are. There's that experience, there's that personal touch, there's the hustle. There's a lot of people want to support people that they perceive as independent businesses, right? I mean, I think we've seen over and over at the technology companies that we serve that are serving independent businesses, or like broker affiliated but still independent businesses, is that people want those businesses to succeed because they think that that's sort of like the fabric of this country or any country, right? They don't necessarily want these big behemoths to win, and there's a lot of pressure, for those businesses to thrive and survive. And so I think it's, you figure out what you're good at, you figure out kind of the area which is not your core competency, and you get some help, right? And so something like your web presence, for example, or your digital tools, you go to a firm like Luxury Presence and get some assistance. You can sort of focus on the stuff that you're particularly good at.
What is your advice for agents that are looking to build a team? Oftentimes, agents become successful as an individual producer and then want to take that next step and actually hire a team and scale much larger than they could on their own. Do you have any advice and lessons learned from seeing early stage startups do that?
I think that you're going to hear a couple of themes in what I've been talking about that sort of repeat themselves. And this point I made sort of about, you know who you are and you know what you're not, I think applies to startups trying to figure out what they're trying to build and what they're not trying to build, who's your customer, who's not your customer, who's your VC and who's not your VC. And I think who's on your team. I really like this concept of just finding the people that are in your tribe, right? And so one thing I've noticed with the really early stage startups is that they're trying to hire people and they're trying to build, hire software engineers, for example, and like they will take anyone who will come, right? Because they just, are just like, oh man, like I don't really know what I'm doing. No one's heard of my company. I'm sort of feel very low ego about the whole thing. When companies go to a certain point in time, they realize, oh man, like the number of people that maybe would want to work with me is much higher than my capacity to actually determine kind of, who, or for me to really take my time and figure out like who's a fit and who's not a fit. And so I need to be choosy, and I need to not be sort of like in the same posture that I was before, right? And so I think there's actually a mistake that some startups make is they're in that early period for too long where they're like, I will hire anyone who will come. I think from day one, I think from your first employee or your co-founder, or your first seed investor or anything like that, it's sort of like, who do I want to work with for 10 years? Who do I want to work with for 20 years? Who shares my values, right? Not in like, we all have to be the same or have the same background. And, and it's not to say that diverse perspectives and that challenge us aren't important. They are important, but things like just feeling like, this is a warm relationship, right? This is something that I can see going on for a long time. I want to spend more time with this person, not less. All those interpersonal cues. I think there's no point in time where it's too early to do that. So, I wouldn't want to give too much advice to real estate agents. I don't know their business that well, but I think, I think keying on your gut signals that you have in your personal life, I think people ignore those to their detriment. I think you want to find people you want to work with for a long time, even if you end up not.
And being explicit about what those things are that make you unique and different and leaning into that, I agree 100% helps attract not just the right customers to your business, but also the right employees that want to be around that and opt into whatever your values are and whatever your culture is. And the more explicit you are, the more unique the values are, the better the fit of the people you bring on.
And I would say that this is one of the things that I've seen you do really well, Malte. I mean, in the past, there have been candidates that I've sent your way that I thought could possibly be good employees or executives at your business. And in some cases, you've hired those people. In some cases, you've come to the determination, hey, like I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned something from you, but I don't think it's quite a fit for. You don't think luxury presence is quite a fit for what they want, and the in the other direction as well, right? And I think you have a really graceful way of arriving to that without like it being a disaster that you spent an hour interviewing that person or that person feeling like they wasted their time or you demean them or anything like that. I mean, I think that that's a skill that you have that's really important. And I think if you're talking about an agent looking to hire their first, their first partner or first employee, I think it's the same thing. You can have these conversations where you're scoping these things out and you're really upfront about what your values are, what your firm is all about. You'll meet people that are excellent, but aren't a match for that. And if those people can walk away from your interactions thinking, hey, like it wasn't a fit, but Malte was awesome. Maybe I do know someone that could be a fit for that person. In startups, usually you see the ones that are successful, the first 10 or 20 employees get kind of pulled in through action like that. Either random encounters sort of turn into people falling in love with your business, or people that fall in love with your business, perhaps it's not 100% a fit, but they know people that can join your business, and all of a sudden you're just pulling people into your gravity. And again, that's, I think for any business, that's helpful.
And you've certainly sent us some amazing people. And I agree that being competent and being excellent at your work and your craft is obviously table stakes and extremely important for any hire you make. But the culture fit is what really will determine you building a team where people are excited to come to work, where they're learning from each other, where they're going to stick around, not just for a couple of years, but for perhaps 5-10 years and help you build whatever it is that you're trying to build. On that note, thanks, Patrick, for joining. It was great having you on.
Appreciate you having me, and hope to do this again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks.